Okay, so what we're going to do in this tutorial is actually start doing some primary color corrections. So color correction itself, yes, it is an artistic endeavor, but it's also a technical endeavor too. It's a bit of both. And so a lot of people look at this sometimes and think, oh, okay, am I supposed to just look at the image and tweak things till I kind of get the look I want? Well, no, actually, there are specific steps that we would want to take, and there are reasons why we do things in particular orders. So we'll start with the first step on that journey, which is going to be adjusting our tonal range, and I'll explain why we would begin here. So what we want to look at with all our images is I'll start with basically the waveform. And if we have elements in our image which should have sort of black and white sections to it, and most images do, then we want to adjust our tonal range on here to match, to basically have something that's black and have something that's white. And like I said, I'll explain why that's where we would begin. So which tools are we going to use to do that? So we need to start with our color wheels. So we'll have a look at these. So we've got 4 color wheels here and 4 sliders. What do they actually do? So our lift, a gamma, and our gain affect the image in 3 areas: the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights. So your shadows will be your darker elements towards the bottom third, your midtones will be the middle section, and then the top third will be your gain, okay, your highlights. So those are kind of your 3 parts that you are affecting based on these. Now they will affect the whole image. So if I take this right now and pull it towards a red, you'll see the whole image starts to take on a red sort of a hue to it. But let me just press this reset button here. By the way, anytime you make a change, you should see a little reset button next to each wheel. If I press that and undo that, notice if you look at the waveform when that's happening, that it still seems to be primarily coming from the upper end. Yeah, you can see that's kind of mostly happening there. The biggest changes, little bits of red are raising everywhere else, but it's primarily doing it there. So they do kind of cross over, they do pull the whole image, but they do pull from a particular point, either from the top, the middle, or from the bottom. So if I was to do it from here, you can see again when I pull that, if you look at the waveform, notice that the biggest change is happening right at the bottom of the waveform rather than from the top. So that's why we have these 3 here. But we actually don't start with color, we start with light. So like I said, tonal range is about adjusting our black and white points. So rather than using these, we're going to use these little sort of sliders underneath, okay, which affect the luminance. So just to quickly demo again, I think the key thing here is to look at the waveform. If I pull this up, you'll notice the bottom of that waveform starts to rise up, and if I pull this slider to the left, you'll see the bottom starts to drop down. Okay, so it's pulling it from there. And again, I'll press the reset button for now. So we're back to where we were. Look at the gain, it will do exactly the same, but from the top. So this is pulling from the top, either down or up. So you can see again how that's sort of where that pulls from. And the gamma will sort of adjust it from the center a little bit. Now I'll leave that there. So you might be like, reset that again. So you might be like, what's the offset for? The offset will not stretch this in any way, it will just move the whole thing up or down. So if we do that, notice the whole thing just slides up or down. There is no stretching of it going on whatsoever. So that can be quite useful sometimes as well as a setup. And again, we'll look at that, or how we might use that just to sort of begin sometimes, especially if, well, actually, let's have a look at it now. So say with something like this, which is very dark, trying to then stretch it from the very bottom is possible, but it's just, everything's kind of compressed. It might make sense to kind of just use the offset to pull something up a bit so it's more near the center, and then stretch it out using our lift and gains. So I'll reset that for now. Again, we'll work through our clips from start to finish. So what we're going to do to begin with, so I'm going to take the gain, given that we have this white sky, and I'm going to pull this up a bit so that it's kind of stretched a little bit towards the top, and then I'm going to take the lift and I'm going to pull that down so that that goes towards the darker end. Now what we're trying to do is, like I said, just use that full range. Okay, so that's what you want to begin with. A tonal range adjustment is just pulling the waveform, stretching it, so you're using the full range. Now notice, even though I pulled it down, most of the information, or a lot of this stuff here, the trees, the grass, the buildings, and so on, they're all really squashed down here. All of this is just sky. So to me, it still looks a little dark. So the other thing you have to do as well is when you're adjusting the tone range, yes, keep an eye on your waveform, but look at your image as well. And it's always a case of any adjustments you make, whether it's color using your vector scope, light using your waveform, you're always looking at these scopes, but looking at your image at the same time. So, or well, maybe you can't look at both at the same time, but looking back and forth across the two. So to me, I'd probably want to pull that up, perhaps use the gamma, see if I can pull that up and then use the lift to stretch that. And you can see it stretching out a bit, but what it's doing is I was just doing that to brighten up the overall image. So again, this becomes slightly more of an artistic choice. Technically, if I was using the full range, I've adjusted the tonal range, but it didn't look right. It just looked too dark. So I'm going to, like I said, adjust that out a bit. There we go. So say if I'm a bit happier with that instead. Okay. Now, if I press Control D for a second just to turn off or disable that, you can see that was what the original image looked like, and that's what it looks like now with the tonal range adjustment. Hopefully a lot better. Okay, original, new image. Now, why do we start with the tonal range? Well, let's have a look at our vector scope. We haven't made any adjustments to color. We're just using the sliders to adjust the luminance. That's it. However, if we disable that again and look at our vector scope, look how much smaller that cloud is there. Whereas if we go back to our version now, look how much larger it is. And remember, with the cloud, the more it comes out, that means the more saturated those colors are. So we've actually made some color adjustments just by adjusting the tonal range. Okay, which kind of makes sense. If you look at that grass color there and look at it now, it has obviously changed. It's brightened up a bit. It has become a bit of a stronger green. Why has that happened? Well, we've changed the range within which that color can exist. The brightest green that could possibly ever be, and the darkest green it could be. And by adjusting that, we have increased the saturation. This is one of the reasons why you want to do tonal range first. Imagine if you started by grading the color of the grass first instead. So this was our original image, and we went in and we started to play with the color wheels and start to make the grass a little bit more green. Okay, the problem we would then have is that we might get to a point where we've got the perfect shade of green. We're like, that's exactly the green we want. And then as soon as we do a tonal range and pull that, that green is going to shift. So we're going to lose that color. So we'd be fighting against ourselves. So we always want to start with a tonal range first, and then we can go in and make color adjustments. Otherwise, the color will change as soon as the tonal range happens. So then we move to our next clip. And so this image we've looked at is just basically too dark. Okay, it's a bit underexposed. We can see that here. The values sort of just go a little bit above the midpoints, sort of a little bit above. But given that we've got whites and so on, it could be a lot higher. So again, what we'll do is we'll just try to stretch that out a bit. So I'll take my highlights, take this down, but because it was so dark, again, what's happening is a majority is sitting at the bottom. So here I'll use my gamma to raise those up again. So again, I'm looking at the image as well in order to decide when I feel it is right. Okay, and I feel like I've washed it out a little bit too much. So I'm going to pull that down slightly. Okay, and so I'm happiest with, say, something like that. And so that's all we're doing. And actually, you might be like, well, this is quite fast. And yeah, it's meant to be. Tonal range adjustments shouldn't take very long at all. Somebody who does who's a colorist and does this for a living would perhaps, depending on the type of program they're working on, be doing these within a few seconds per clip, literally just running through, adjusting it, next clip. And this one we said, like, because it is so dark, it's going to be very difficult to pull it up. So we're going to use the offset. And by the way, just in case you're wondering how it seems to be doing quite well with a lot of these color adjustments. These are all 10-bit ProRes video files shot off the Blackmagic cinema camera. And so the 10-bit files generally are retaining a lot more color information than, say, your typical H.264 file would, for example. So you'll find that there will be room to kind of really pull these color values out a bit. Okay, here we go. So again, not too bad. Oops. Just trying to see what's right. There we go. So say something like that. Okay, and again, let's just quickly go back to the original. Just look like that to that. Okay, and so again, like I said, that's basically it. That's all we want to do. Just go in and set these up to where we feel they are correct. A little bit based on looking at the visuals and also just looking at the waveform. And with the last one, what you'll find as well is because it's already incorrectly white balanced and we know that the saturation increases, what you're going to find is as we do that, it's going to become more blue. So we're going to need to then fix that. But again, we would do that next. Right now, we've just done our um, tonal range adjustments. And the other thing is actually I wasn't looking at these, but I'd probably want to, if you like, you can imagine these might be from the same scene, or like maybe not the same. Well, they're not. These are almost identically framed, but they're most slightly different framed. But you might have a lot of shots that follow one after the other on the same scene. What the other thing you'd be looking at as well is trying to make sure all the colors, sorry, the brightness and so on matches. So I'd be looking at things like the table perhaps to see the difference between one shot and the other, looking at sort of the overall highlights. Now in this one there is a bit of sort of light just kind of flooding in, which the other shot doesn't have as much of. But I just want to look at some objects and just see that I've kind of brightened them up at the same. And you can see the first one, the shadows are a little bit darker. And if you look here, for example, you can see the details change slightly. So again, I might just need to, whereas the highlights or the sort of the bits on the top of this container don't seem to change too much. So it might be that I just need to go into here and pull some of the shadows up. Okay, but what I'd be doing is trying to match shots up as well in regards to brightness very quickly so that they work quite well. So with these two, obviously that's going to need a little bit more work because the color needs adjusting, but we'll look at that next. Okay, thank you for watching.